Hey there, in this video I want to talk about the most common class of errors, and that's the exceptions. These luckily will tell you where things are going wrong, or at least where things are crashing. They'll give you a message, and with experience these become much easier to diagnose. Not always quick, but at least you have some guidance from Python. So let's look at this example up here. Now, of course, this would be a lot easier to understand if I wrote some comments, hint, hint, you should write some comments in your code. But let's try to figure out what has gone wrong. So I get this message down here, list index out of range. This has something to do with me trying to use a list beyond its end. So the list here is going to have 10 things in it. It's going to be powers of 2, or not powers of 2, square numbers. So it's going to be like 1, 4, 9, 16. And there should be 10 of them, and somewhere in here I must be trying to access it past the end. Specifically, we can see right here at this line, if we try to index at element I and then do a modulo here, it must not be happy about this I here. I must be too big. So that's my hunch, at least based on what Python is telling me. Let's see if we can diagnose that problem. So again, I know the length of numbers is 10. And if I was ever unsure of that, I could print it just to check. I could print length numbers. And just to check, that print statement will run because it's before the code crashes. So it's 10. And I might want some other print statement to help me out here. So I can do a print I. Okay, so this is going to give me some information about what's happening. And actually, let's get this print statement out of the way just so I'm not being confused by it. So the length is 10, which means I'm only allowed to index up to 9 because we have to start with index 0. So let's see, I got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now it's not happy. All right, so that seems a little weird. I should be allowed to index up to 6. Maybe something else is going on here. So let's print that, and let's also print the length of numbers. Because surely the length of numbers is more than 6. The length of numbers is 10. Wait, the length of numbers is changing. And in fact, right before it crashes, the length of numbers is only 5, and I'm trying to access element 6. Well, clearly that would make it crash, but why is the length of the numbers changing? Well, if I look down here, I can see the statement del numbers. If you haven't seen this command before, del deletes a Python variable. It makes it disappear. And you can delete elements out of a list, but that is terribly dangerous and bad to do if you're also doing a for loop through that list. So what we're doing here is we're going through the length of numbers originally. So the original length of numbers is 10. Right? Because when we evaluate length numbers, we get the constant value 10. So this is saying for I in range 10, and meanwhile numbers is getting shorter, and we end up eventually stepping past the end of it. That was the error here. Now, fixing this code would require a fairly major rewrite, and we'd have to figure out what it was that the writer was trying to do in the first place, but we figured out the cause of our error. The cause of our error is our list is shrinking at the same time we're iterating over it. Probably what we wanted to do was make a copy of it. That would probably be the easiest way to fix this code. So we'd make another list that's a copy, using .copy of these numbers, and then we'd modify that list as we went. Here's our second example here. So this has some functions in it. We've got a global variable x, we've got an incrementer function, we have a function that prints the result. So it's supposed to be the old value of x is x, increment the new value of x is. And then we run the print result function. Okay, so when I run that code, we can see here that it will crash. We'll get our trace back. Always start at the bottom. At the bottom it says unbound local error, local variable x referenced before assignment. Now, I've seen these messages before, so I know what that means. If you have, you'd be like, what is this strange? Well, so you Google what that means. And what it's telling you about is you have an issue with local variables versus global variables. We have an arrow right here. So again, we start at the bottom. Things break right at the line x equals x plus 1. And that's our problem right there. So we've seen in the previous example here how we could use print statements to debug. We could use assert statements in a similar sort of way. They stop the code when they get triggered. Let's try a comment. Let's just remove that line and see if it works now. All right, so the code doesn't really do very much anymore, but that tells me that is definitely a line that is breaking it. So a key here that I want to do with these more complicated errors is I'm trying to find what is the minimum bit of code that causes the crash. I'm trying to zero in where is the error. So that's less that I have to think about. So it is not happy at all with the statement x equals x plus 1. All right, so it doesn't like x equals x plus 1. Well, what is x? Is it using this global variable up here? So like I could do a print statement. Let's try to print x before I do that line. And it's immediately mad. As soon as I try to print x, it's angry. Now, why? Shouldn't I be able to print x? X is this global variable here. Well, x is a global variable, and then we have an x equals in here. This is kind of a subtlety of how Python treats local variables versus global variables. But if you have an x equals in your code, that's telling Python that this is my local variable x. It's not the same thing as the global variable x. If I want the global variable x, I need to tell it, hey, I'm using global x. And then I can do assignment statements. So I'm not allowed to do x equals for global variables unless I've told Python that that is a global variable. It's a one-line fix in this case, but it's kind of a subtle one that can easily catch you off guard if you've never run into it before. In fact, an even more sinister version of this is if we make this x plus equals 1, because the equals is a little bit less obvious to you in that case. If we try that, it's going to crash with the very same sort of error, because plus equals means the same thing as x equals x plus 1. We have the x equals in there. Again, your fix in this particular case would be to declare x as a global variable. In general, using global variables in your functions is not very good style because you're just asking for trouble like this. You would really be much better off passing the value x as an argument here. It would be a much better way to write it. Okay, so in this video, we just went through 2 examples, and there are endless ways that code will crash, and you will, of course, see them in your programming careers here. But I just want to emphasize the sort of tools we use. We can use print statements, very similar if we were using assert statements. We can comment out code. We're trying to zero in and find out where the error happened. What is our code actually doing? And that will then help us come up with some way to fix the code. Also notice as we went through this, it would have been really nice if there were a lot of comments in this code. Just to emphasize to you, when you write code, if it has any complexity at all, you should have comments in it to help you or anybody who's looking at it, like me, if you ask me for help, what is the code supposed to do? So we have some kind of starting point.